all for being here. This is our last time together for this specific video series. One more time, my name is Alexander James, and I'm joined to my right by
Chris Gwaltney. I'm assuming I'm the one to your right. It's different.
Yeah, you are. Yeah.
I'm Chris. Hopefully you know me by now. I'm with Love Thy Nerd, Chief Executive Nerd.
Yeah, man, that's a very sought after position, and we're honored to have our good friend Jamie Harris here with us. How you doing, Jamie?
I'm doing well.
Awesome, man. Tell the people who you are and why it matters that you're here. Why are you an expert in this specific field?
Other than having a beautiful mane of hair.
Yeah, man. That's very Legolas of you.
Yeah, it's a little darker, but I'll take it. I am here because I suppose one would call me an expert because I'm part of a group called Satellite Gaming. I don't have a fancy title like Chief Executive Nerds. I think we just say like...
not part of it. You started that thing.
Yeah, we're just like lead director thing. Yeah, so I'm the founder of Satellite Gaming, and we're a youth-based video game ministry. We just love pointing kids to Jesus through, students to Jesus through using video game culture.
Yeah, man, that's awesome, man. Thank you so much for being here. We wanted to use this last episode to really kind of answer the question that I think is in the back of their minds, Chris. I think a lot of folks, even if they're really like, we're loving this content, we're loving this idea, we want to go try it, but I think there's this one question that they are concerned about that they think maybe some of their higher ups or their pastors are going to ask them. It's like, we're doing all this gaming, but when do we start doing church?
Yeah.
Even hearing you say that just makes you cringe a little bit.
Yeah, you literally just triggered PTSD in Jamie right now because I know he's gotten that question. Him and I have talked and joked about it. I've had that question happen so many times over the years. Like, when do you present the gospel message? When do you start baptizing? When do you start doing all these things? And I don't know, Jamie, like, why don't you just kick us off with this one a little bit? Maybe share some of your experience of that question and how you've answered it.
Yeah, a real specific instance I remember. It was actually pretty heart-wrenching. It was when we were still a youth ministry. I was a youth pastor at our local church I still go to. And I remember starting this video game thing, and kids were showing up. We had a youth group. It was like 15 kids, but we had about 40 kids showing up to these events. So it's just much larger than our regular audience. And I remember someone said, well, at what point are you presenting the gospel? And I was like, well, I mean, isn't that what we should always be doing? Like whether we're using words or not. And he was an individual that was going to financially support this. And he basically like pulled out his wallet and implied that if I do a verbal gospel presentation at these events that he'd be willing to give more money to it. And I know that's like worst case scenario, and that's not all the responses we've gotten, but I guess in my mind, I'm thinking like, well, then give your money to someone else. Like, I know that sounds messed up, but like, that's just not what we were going for, Yeah. And that's my probably the most like prominent experience I can think of.
Well, and I think too, like Jamie, for people that don't know more about Satellite Gaming, like before all this quarantine stuff happened, like you were doing after school programs in the public school system. And that's just not something you would be able to do if you were giving this super overt, like gospel presentation kind of thing. So like, it's really been such an important part of the students you guys have been able to reach.
For sure. And I do want to clarify, I want to clarify that like there is a place for that. There are events where we do verbal gospel presentations, but if my options are like do a verbal gospel presentation 100% of the time and be out of the school district, or be selective when we do that and have an audience in the public school, like I'll take the second one 100 times out of 100 times. Like it's just the way it is.
Yeah, man. And what I think is so important about that is this idea that the question itself assumes a lot, right? So when someone says, so when do we start doing church, it insinuates that we haven't been doing church yet. And what I really wanted to spend our time talking about this conversation is just kind of helping folks see and maybe pull back the layers that I think we've been doing church the whole time. And because it's maybe not shaped and wrapped in some of the forms that we normally would see, it takes maybe a trained eye to check it out. So the first video you guys saw after the intro talked a lot about this idea of finding affinity, which means like I want to to find the thing that you enjoy, that the group I want to connect with enjoys. And in this instance, it's nerd culture, it's gaming, it's anime. I want to find that space and literally just enjoy it with them. I want to find the affinity that they're already having community around. Because here's the thing, just because there aren't youth maybe kicking down the doors at your church doesn't mean they don't have a space and have community already. The youth we're trying to reach, that the church is trying to pour into, they have a place already. We just have to be willing to go where they actually are. And I think there's tons of examples of Jesus doing that, where he literally spoke the language of the people that he was trying to communicate to. And even Jamie brought up earlier before we got on the call about an example with Paul. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I instantly go to the story in the book of Acts where Paul is approaching kind of in this like common area. He's approaching a group of people that maybe don't see eye to eye with him on a lot of things. And some of you are super familiar with the story, I'm sure. Some of you aren't. But basically what he does, he walks up and he quotes a couple things that if you don't look for it, you're thinking like, oh, he's quoting scripture, like he's quoting the Bible. Like, no, this dude is out there like dropping like hymns to pagan gods. Like he's quoting a hymn to a pagan god.
Wow.
And I wrote a sermon one time. This was before he did a Christian hip hop album, but I called it Quote More Kanye. And the idea of the message was like, these kids need to understand us in a way that like makes sense to them. So if I walk into a skate park and I'm quoting like Toby Mac, they're gonna be like, dude, what are you doing? But if I'm quoting Kanye, there's gonna be some affinity there. There's gonna be this common ground. And I think like what Paul's desire was like, I want to reach these people that understand pagan culture, but don't necessarily understand Jesus. So he's going to try to find a way to do that. Now, obviously, I don't think we should all go and start like quoting hymns to Zeus and some of the rap artists that are out there.
Yeah, please don't.
Finding a way, yeah, please don't. But finding a way to speak, to communicate in such a way that like relates to other people and invites them into conversation. I think that's key to finding affinity. And I think Jesus set the example and Paul followed that example. And I think we should too.
Yeah, man, absolutely.
Something I would say about this too is like, there is such a fine line when it comes to this phase, because we've all seen the churches that they try to put on the skin and they try to talk the talk and walk the walk, but you can sniff out the agenda from a mile away.
Oh.
Right.
There's this place online. It's a subreddit on Reddit called Fellow Kids. And it's literally just dedicated to people sharing instances where people were trying to act. It's basically just posers. Like they're trying to act one way, but you can just tell like it's just way off base.
Wow.
And so there's such a fine line between that and actual like authenticity. And I think that's so important when it comes to this phase.
Yeah,
sure.
man. Like that first phase is really just about like slowing down to learn the language so you can reach the people, right? Like even if you don't necessarily, we're not saying everybody has to be an esports champion. What we're saying is learn the controller enough so you can play with the kids that you want to get to know better.
Right.
The same way that the FCA would use sports as a vehicle to get the kids, why can't the church use sports and gaming to reach the kids that it's not reaching next? And then we go into phase 2, right? After we find that affinity, then we create proximity, right? So now I get to be close to you and we can like that thing together. I think it's amazing how many kids and youth may be in a church, but no one really feels close to them. I mean, when we think about the idea of feeling close to you, it's like they should know your name, they know your language, your likes, your dislikes. And I think it's important for us to consider as we're using gaming to minister to people to go, I get to be closer to them in some ways and in some circumstances that I wasn't before.
Yeah. So, Jamie, this is another thing that I think you guys have done really well with satellite gaming. And we mentioned a little bit earlier, like you just go into the schools, like you are literally creating proximity where, students are spending most of their time. So, I mean, what does that look like for you? Like, what kind of benefits have you seen?
Man, I think that's where it gets a little sticky sometimes, not only in like the ministry context, but also just from a community context, because then you get into things like, well, if I'm playing games that these kids are playing just to hang out with them, does that mean I pick up like a controller and play GTA online with a 12-year-old? Like, probably not. But does that mean maybe I can like play some Fortnite? Well, I don't know. Some people may be uncomfortable with that. Even Smash Bros. There's people punching each other. Like, is that okay for a 7-year-old? You know, that's where you got to start making decisions. But I think what we show when we say we're ready to pick up these games and play them, it's kind of what you say to a teenager that wants to play football. Like, you think about the concept of football, they're running into each other full speed. Like, no, I don't like the fact that you're hitting this kid as hard as you possibly can. And if you hit him hard enough, he doesn't fall to the ground. But I tell you what, I know you're going to do it anyway. So here's some football pads, and we're going to give you a coach so you learn how to do it a little safer. We're kind of trying to do that same thing to video games, kind of put some football pads on it and try to learn how to at least make it somewhat safe, and maybe draw some lines on, like, in football, yeah, you can't punch them. You can't grab their collar and pull it down. Well, yeah, we're not going to play GTA where you can do A, B, and C thing that you kind of wish you could do, but you can't. So I think create proximity, but with some very healthy boundaries. That's where we found the most success.
Yeah, man, and that's so good, because it also exposes the fact that the set of rules that we have for sports, for some reason, don't apply for gamers. We'll let folks, we'll send the young whippersnapper out to go play football and get mad at them for not being more aggressive. But then give them a game and say, how dare you do a fatality in Mortal Kombat, right? So that's a finishing move.
Why are you getting so aggressive?
Right, how could you get so aggressive? And I think all of this should be done with prayer and with wisdom.
Amen.
But what we're saying is that you have to be willing to get in the boat with the kids before you can be the captain of the boat.
Yeah, you got to understand. You can't just make rules on football and not know football. Like, the people that made those rules, like, understand the culture well enough, It's not just some grumpy parent being like, meh, meh.
Awesome.
That's my grumpy parent noise. Meh.
So the next phase we talked about is growing influence. And one of my favorite thoughts behind this is the idea of leaders like yourself that's watching this, or us here, is humbling ourselves to let the students become the teachers.
Yeah,
like I just think back to when I was that age and how meaningful it was for me when people that I looked up to and respected would flip the script, and they would ask me questions as though I was the expert. And man, like, that just speaks volumes to people. So I guess I'm curious, from either of you guys, like, when are times that we saw, this happening in the Bible, or even Jesus specifically, like, humbling himself and flipping the script in that way? If you don't know the answer to this, you're not really a Christian.
Yeah, man. I think the one that screams out to me, man, is when the Marys run up to Jesus and they say, Lazarus has died. And Jesus waits 3 more days and weeps. But I love the fact that this God of the universe, who has all power, who's omniscient, who's like, he's God and man simultaneously, but he says, take me where you laid him. As if Jesus doesn't know where Lazarus' body is. And then he says, roll the stone away. And Jesus, obviously at Easter, has experienced rolling stones away. Right? He's good at that. He got that on speed dial. Uber for stones. Roll out the way. Right? And then he says, then he calls out to him. And that's one of the part that I love, that Jesus invites us to work with him. But the part that actually takes Holy Spirit power, the actual raising from the dead, he does that all by his lonesome. But he invites us even into this moment, because he literally says, I am praying out loud so everyone knows that this is you doing this and not me. Like, he invites us even into the Holy Spirit moment. Then Lazarus gets up and he's like, take off his burial clothes and give him some food. Jesus, at every opportunity, allows us to be the young kid handing his dad the screwdriver under the car. He could get it himself, but he lovingly invites us into that process. And I think that we need to be more willing to be the students, right? To let our kids teach us, and let them be a part of ministering to them. Like, how often do kids get the chance to build ministry for their friends, and we empower and equip and pour into them for them to be the leaders, and for us to take the back seat and do what I like to call leading from behind.
Yeah. And I know, Jamie, you got a lot of experience with this too, because I think you just do a great job pouring into students and raising them up too. How have you seen this play out with what you're doing?
Oh man, I think First I'll say from a biblical perspective, the story I think of a few of them, but the one that sticks out the most is when Jesus is looking for the disciples to be a part of what he's doing, right? Like, and he calls them out and he says, hey, come with me. I want to make you fishers of men. They're getting to know him a little bit. They're kind of helping him. They're like, all right, I'm going to go with you. And there's this part where like Jesus goes out to preach to a group of people, and he's going out on the water because he understands, like, he's a good speaker. He understands the voice travels across the water, so he sets himself up for this God-made amphitheater, and it's so funny because he says, hey, can I use your boat? I think it was like to Peter or something, maybe James, I can't remember, but can I use your boat? And the guy's like, yeah, you can use my boat. Well, what if the guy said no? Like, what if the guy said no? Well, Jesus would just find another boat. But the ironic thing is, like, he didn't need the boat, right? Like the whole point of that was not that he needed the guy's boat. The point of that was that Jesus is going to do stuff. He's going to do stuff. He's going to make it happen. And he's invited us to be a part of that. And I think in this culture of reaching, in this idea of reaching nerd culture, God's ready to do something. And I'm not the kind of guy that says, like, you can miss God. Don't be late for church because you'll miss him. Like, no, I mean, don't be late for church because you shouldn't be late for things. I mean, I'm late for church like almost every Sunday, but like, just my point is, like, God wants to do something and he wants you and I to be a part of it. Like, why would we say no to that? And so I think where I see it, that in our context, in our story, is we have a student leadership program. And we have students that live stream on our channel. We have students that run our events for us. Like, they go to the schools and they'll run an event for us. Our middle school event was run, like the Smash Bros tournament was pretty much run by high schoolers. And could some of our leaders do a better job? If you're listening or watching, high school students, I love you. But they're more experienced. They maybe could have done a better job. But if we're focused on doing this like perfect job and we're not including younger people, I think we're shooting ourselves in the foot. So we actually let them lead, and we say, you know what, there's a chance this could be worse, but you know what? They might do a better job than I do because I don't speak the language as well as they do. So
I once heard, thinking about delegation, I think maybe it was like Craig Groeschel that said this, Life Church. He said, if you delegate something to somebody and they do it to 70% of how you would have done it, that is a huge success.
Yeah.
Like a huge success, because their ownership is through the roof, their experience, like all that stuff.
Right. And that leads us to our last phase, right? Phase 4, which talks about lasting impact, right? After you share that influence, you give them that opportunity, then you grow these leaders. And then 2-3 years later, the kids that were soft-spoken, introverted, not really engaged, but present because their parents made them, are now making their parents bring them because they have to run the meeting for the next event that's coming and serve their friends and their youth. They feel empowered and seen, and that's the impact we want. We want folks to know that this PDF that we're sending out, this information where we're dumping on you guys, it's not about getting 500 kids in your church. If that happens, amen. But the goal is what are we pouring inside kids, not who we're pouring inside churches. This is about putting encouragement and self-discipline and confidence inside the hearts of kids that don't feel seen, that feel overlooked. So the greatest lasting impact we could have is developing the next generation of leaders. So leaders that are watching this, ask yourself, if we were to do a gaming ministry, who are the kids that I know right now could potentially lead this thing? And what can I do to begin to set them up and maneuver them in a way where they can take on that kind of leadership? And I think to kind of put a cap on it would be, Jamie has this awesome story of what happened with one of his youth in his own church, and we'll hear that and leave it there.
Cool. Yeah, this story, it's always really fun to tell, and it's a story I'll never forget. And what I would say is one of the most impactful things for me is when we have stories to tell. Like, if we have an event, we have 2 kids show up, we have 100 kids show up, I'm like, guys, I want to hear a story when this is all said and done. So this is probably the most like prominent story, but no, like, this is one of many. I was a youth pastor at Lake Point Community Church. It's still my home church. I love it. And this is when we had first started doing these events. I went to my senior pastor and I said, hey, I just want to play video games. It's not going to be like it's going to be hosted by Christians, but it's not going to be a Christian event. Like, we want to do this in a way that allows us to invite the public schools. And I said, I've talked to the schools. They said if we host a community event where we just play games and hang out, that we could hand out flyers at school. So he's like, go for it. It's okay. What's my budget? He's like, you don't have a budget. Charge him at the door. I'm like, oh, okay. So we have some kids show up. We get some pizza. And I don't know, a bunch of kids were able to bring their friends. And I'm going to skip a few parts here because most of you will have access to a PDF where you can read the story in detail. But here's what happens. This young man named Matthew, he was in our student ministry. He was one of the first kids in the ministry when I was there. He starts inviting this friend Nathan to church. And Nathan just, like, I don't know, he wouldn't show up to youth group, wouldn't show up to preachy events, wouldn't show up to like even game nights at youth group. But we do this community event and he's like, I'm down. You're not going to preach at me. I just get to play Smash Bros. I'm down. Shows up, plays some Smash Bros.
How many of us have a Nathan in our ministries right now?
Right.
Like some of y'all watching have 2 or 3 Nathans right now.
I'm Nathan.
Yeah. So he's like, all right, I'll come to this. So he shows up. And eventually he realizes, Matthew says to him, he says, hey bro, we do this before and after youth group. And he's like, really? Yeah. Okay. I guess it's worth it to go to youth group. So he starts showing up 15 minutes early to youth group, plays some Smash Bros, stays 15 minutes late after youth group, plays some Smash Bros. He gets some snacks and stuff. We play some games and he doesn't really fall asleep during the messages, but you can tell he's not really into it. So fast forwarding a bit, Matthew was like one of our core leaders in the ministry. He was a sophomore going into his junior year. That was the year he could start helping out with middle school camp. So Matthew's going to be a leader at middle school camp. I get a call from him like the day before camp. I'm sure you guys all have one of these kids too, right? When he calls you like just before something's about to happen, you're like, dude, are you going to bail on me? Are you going to bail on me? Is that what's going on right now? My camera got all fuzzy. But so I pick up the phone. I'm like, Matthew, are you bailing on me? And he's like, yeah, man, I can't go to camp. And I'm like, selfishly, I'm like, dude, you piece of... I was like, why aren't you coming to camp? And he just kind of stops and it gets pretty real. He says, Nathan's dad died in his sleep last night and I just think I need to be here for him. And I remember I was with another one of our student leaders at the time and I was like, dude, you're right. You cannot come to camp. And it just hit me that like, how selfish am I that like, my first concern is like, this kid's not going to be a leader. Now what am I going to do? It's like, no, Nathan has some real hurt in his life. Yeah. And so I'm just kind of like, okay, all right, we don't go to camp. Please stay with Nathan, show him some love, just be there for him. So a number of months go by. We don't hear from Nathan at all. We don't want to press him. We don't want to push him. I check in with Matthew. He's like, he's doing okay. And one night, Nathan shows up at church and we're doing a series on discipleship. And I'm thinking another selfish thought, like what more Christianese topic could we possibly be talking about when this kid decides to show up? And I'm like, he's going to think we're like weird Jedi or something like that. And as I'm talking about discipleship, I'm spitting out verses about it, telling us some stories about Jesus. And we finish up the main message. We get into small groups, and this is where the kids are all squirmy because they're like, okay, small groups means we're almost done. It means I can go play Smash Bros in a little bit. And I just asked this question. I open it up. Can you name someone in your life who is a good disciple of something? I was expecting like Darth Vader is a good disciple of the dark side, because that's like our kids, a bunch of nerds. Yeah. And Nathan speaks up. Nathan, this unchurched kid who is like claimed that he's like borderline agnostic, maybe even atheist, and he's like not really a whole God thing. He speaks up and he says, I think Matthew is a good disciple of Jesus. And I'm just like, what do I say? As a good small group leader, I'm like, okay, I'm not just gonna be like, thanks, Nathan, and move on. Like, no, how do I capitalize on this? So I'm like, Nathan, tell me why you'd say that. Like, what makes, and he just said, I've been through a lot. And Jamie, you said something, and I'm like, you pay attention? And he's like, you said that Jesus said to his disciples that they would know you're my disciples by the way you show each other love. And I'm like, do you want to run the small group? Like, I'm done. That's it. And all my kids who like grew up in Christian schools are like, oh man, this kid's smart, and I just like, wow. So another thing that I like to do as a small group leader is affirm like positive interactions after small group. I pull Nathan and Matthew aside. I'm like, Matthew, hear what he said, dude. Did you hear that? Like, good for you. High five. Pre-corona, so we could give high fives. I'm like, high five. Let's go. This is awesome. I'm like, Matthew, good job. And I said, Nathan, thanks for sharing that, man. And they're like looking at Smash Bros. Like, come on, can we go now? My mom's gonna be here in 10 minutes. And I'm like, hey, let me just ask you this, Nathan. Why are you here? Why do you keep coming back? And he's like, Smash Bros. I'm like, no, dude, don't say Smash Bros. Why are you here? You can play Smash Bros. Anyway, tonight. Why are you here at church where we're talking about Jesus? And dude, oh man, and like I get goosebumps every time. I remember, dude, not even kidding. His face, like immediately, like I swear it hit the ground. He looked down, and within seconds, like there was just a puddle of tears, like anime trope to the max, like puddle of tears on the ground. And he just says, this summer I lost my dad, and the reason I'm here is because ever since I lost him, there's been this massive hole in my heart, and the only time that hole feels full is when I'm here around people that love Jesus. And in that moment, I was like, dude, you understand the gospel more than most adults. And most adults that grew up in church. And to kind of jump ahead, that spring, he went on a mission trip with us, gave his life to Jesus. That summer, he got baptized. That fall, he started helping out in youth ministry at our church. And now, as a young man, graduated from high school a couple of years ago, he is the youngest member on our board of directors at Satellite Gaming, and eventually shared the love of Jesus with his mom. And his mom, you know, she's fully engaged with our church now, and she's dying because she's like, I just want to be around you guys again. I want to give you hugs. And this Corona thing's killing her, but she's thirsting to be a part of that community. And all it is this is just as much Matthew's story as it is Nathan's. Matthew, he just shut up in a time where he didn't say like, hey, Nathan, you know, God says that let your worries and troubles, you know, bring you wisdom. He's like, no, dude, your dad died. I just want to love you through it. And I just want to play Smash Bros with you. And I tell you what, man, Matthew understood what he was called to do. He just shut up and he loved the kid. And it's beautiful, man.
Yeah, man. And I think what's most powerful about that story, I guess the best like KO punch after all these videos and all these documents that we're dumping on you guys is what we're really selling is community management. Like, just manage this community and keep Jesus and use gaming as the platform to prop up this community of people, and watch how the Holy Spirit moves in and through the hearts of people in this community that you manage. Man, Jamie, thank you so much for being here with us, man, and sharing that awesome story.
Thanks for having me.
Chris, man, this is our last video, man. What do you want to send these awesome youth leaders, these pastors, these nerds, these future nerd fans of nerds? What do you want to send them out the door with? Then you can close it out.
Look, there is such a tremendous opportunity here at church. We have missed it so many times.
Yeah.
We missed it when we thought Elvis was the devil. We missed it when we thought reading fiction novels was the devil. We missed it when we were burning CDs and magazines. We missed it when we said Dungeons and Dragons was the devil.
Yeah, man.
We are missing it right now with gamers and nerds. It's cool to be a nerd now, almost. Like,
thank you, Marvel.
Thank you, Marvel. Yeah.
Seriously, like, and we're missing it because we're still spinning the same tired narrative that God can't be present in everything and all things everywhere. And so let us as people of Jesus point to where we see God, point to where we see the Spirit moving, and help all the Nathans, all the nerds out there, lost and lonely.
Amen.
Let's bring them together and welcome them into the family. Let's get about it.
Right, y'all. So thank you all so much for watching this video series. And go play some games.
Yeah.
And eventually, share the love of Christ.
Love you guys.
Peace.
Peace.
See you.